Welcome, thrill seekers, to the edge of reality, where the lines between the living and the lost blur in the shadows of the unknown. Tonight's tale is not just a story, it's a warning. When the night falls and the city sleeps, some buses take more than just passengers. But beware, not everyone who boards gets off. The last ride. The evening sky was a heavy, dark canvas, smeared with clouds that threatened rain. Sarah Mitchell pulled her coat tighter around her slender frame as she waited at the bus stop, the biting wind creeping into every exposed inch of her skin. She had always been tall and athletic, but tonight, after a grueling double shift at the hospital, she felt small, fragile, like a leaf clinging to a branch in the middle of a storm. Her long brown hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and her hazel eyes, usually so sharp and observant, were rimmed with exhaustion. The fatigue wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional. Days and nights of watching patients slip away, the constant hum of machines, the smell of antiseptic, it was all starting to wear her down. All she wanted was to get home, collapse onto her worn-out couch, and forget the world for a while. Her breath came in slow, visible puffs, mingling with the chilly air. She glanced at her watch, 11:15 p.m. The bus was late again. It was always late on nights like this, when the city streets were empty and the usual chatter of nightlife had faded into silence. She stood under the dim, flickering streetlight, the harsh glow casting strange shadows along the sidewalk. Sarah shivered, but it wasn't just from the cold. Something felt off. She had taken this bus dozens of times before, but tonight was different. The air felt heavier, as though the very atmosphere around her was thick with tension. A deep sense of unease crept up her spine, gnawing at the edges of her mind. She glanced around, scanning the street. There was no one else at the stop, no one walking nearby. The buildings were dark, windows like dead eyes staring out into the night. She checked her phone. No messages, no missed calls. Her fingers lingered over the screen as she debated whether to call a cab instead, but her thoughts were interrupted by a faint hiss in the distance. The bus. It was finally here. Its headlights appeared first, glowing through the mist like two burning eyes. The large vehicle slowed as it approached the stop, the sound of its brakes an eerie, low screech that seemed too loud in the stillness of the night. The bus came to a stop in front of her, the doors opening with a mechanical hiss. Sarah hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn around and walk home instead. But the thought of the long, cold trek through the dark streets made her shake off her fear. After all, it was just a bus. The same bus she had taken countless times. She stepped on. The interior was dimly lit, the overhead lights flickering sporadically. As she moved down the aisle, she noticed the passengers, if she could even call them that. Each one sat perfectly still, eyes staring straight ahead, unblinking. Their faces were obscured by shadows, their postures rigid, almost unnatural. No one moved or even acknowledged her presence. Sarah chose a seat near the back, away from the others, and tried to calm her racing heart. The doors closed with a metallic thud, and the bus lurched forward. She settled into her seat, but the feeling of unease only grew. There was something wrong with the other passengers, something that made her skin crawl. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it felt as though they weren't really there, as if they were just hollow shells, sitting in the shadows. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a welcome distraction. She fumbled for it, hands trembling slightly. No notifications, just the clock glaring back at her. 11:25 p.m. How much longer was this ride going to take? She stared out the window, trying to shake the feeling, but even the familiar city streets looked different tonight. The world outside the bus seemed warped, like it was trapped in some kind of dream or nightmare. Buildings she knew well appeared distorted, their shapes stretching and twisting in unnatural ways. The streetlights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The bus rattled on through the eerie, empty streets, and Sarah's unease grew into full-blown fear. She glanced around the bus again, her breath catching in her throat. The passengers, they hadn't moved an inch since she'd boarded. Not a single twitch, no shifting in their seats, not even a blink. It was as if they were statues, locked in place. Her heart pounded harder as she realized something even more unsettling. She didn't remember seeing the bus driver when she got on. Suddenly, the bus screeched to a halt, jolting her forward. The doors slid open with that same grating hiss. Sarah looked up, expecting to see someone boarding, but the stop was empty. No one was there. Then, from the front of the bus, she heard it a slow, deliberate footstep. Her blood turned to ice as she craned her neck to see. A figure was moving down the aisle, its footsteps heavy and measured, like the ticking of a clock. It was a man, tall and gaunt, dressed in a dark, old-fashioned suit that looked like it belonged to another time. His face was pale, almost corpse-like, and his eyes were empty, black voids that seemed to suck the light out of the air around him. He walked slowly, passing the motionless passengers without a glance, his eyes fixed directly on her. Sarah's heart raced as the man drew closer, his gaze never wavering. She pressed herself against the window, her body screaming with the urge to flee. But she was frozen in place. As he neared her seat, she could feel the temperature drop, the air growing impossibly cold. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the mist from her exhalations hanging in the frigid air. The man stopped just inches away from her, his black eyes boring into hers. For a long, agonizing moment, he simply stood there, staring at her, his presence suffocating. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the front of the bus. The doors slammed shut, and the bus lurched forward again. Sarah was trembling, her mind reeling. Who was that man? What was happening? She had to get off this bus now. But before she could even think about moving, the bus made another sharp turn, and everything outside the window changed. The familiar streets were gone, replaced by an endless stretch of darkness. No lights, no buildings, no signs of life, just a vast, empty void that seemed to swallow the bus whole. Panic set in. Sarah scrambled to her feet, ready to run to the front, to pound on the doors and beg to be let off. But as she stood, she caught a glimpse of the passengers again. This time, they were looking at her. their lifeless, hollow eyes all fixed on her at once, their heads turning in perfect unison, their faces expressionless. A scream caught in her throat as the reality of the situation finally hit her. She wasn't going home. She was on the last ride. Sarah awoke with a start, her breath ragged, her body shaking. The bus was no longer moving, and when she looked around, she realized she was alone. The eerie passengers, the strange man gone. The world outside had returned to its normal, quiet streets, the city still bathed in the cold glow of streetlights. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed the whole thing. But the terror in her chest hadn't subsided. Her phone buzzed in her hand again, reminding her of the world outside the bus. She fumbled to open it and checked the time, 12:05 a.m. Almost an hour had passed, but she had no memory of it. Slowly she stood, her legs weak and trembling, and made her way to the front of the bus. There was still no driver in sight. The doors opened on their own, and Sarah stepped off, the cold air hitting her like a slap to the face. She stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of everything. Had it been real, or was it some bizarre hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress? She had seen strange things during her shifts at the hospital, but this felt real, too real. She started walking, retracing her steps. The city was eerily quiet, the usual bustle of nightlife absent. As she passed darkened shops and empty street corners, the weight of the experience hung over her, making every shadow seem menacing. Her mind raced until she reached a familiar intersection, the one near the stop where she had boarded the bus. The area looked the same, ordinary even. There was no sign of the bus, no strange man, no eerie passengers. But there was also no comfort in the familiarity of the streets. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone, dialing St. Mary's Hospital, her workplace. The receptionist answered. "St. Mary's ER, how can I help you?" Sarah took a deep breath. "It's Sarah. Was there any accident tonight? A bus accident, maybe?" The receptionist paused. "A bus? No reports of anything like that. Why? Is everything okay?" Sarah hung up, feeling more confused than ever. Her mind was spinning. Had it all been in her head? She turned to head home when something caught her eye, a piece of paper fluttering in the wind, pinned to the side of a lamppost. She walked over and grabbed the piece of paper, holding it under the dim street light. It was a missing person flyer. Her eyes widened as she scanned the details. Missing Robert Hammond, 17 years old. Last seen on the 8:30 p.m. bus near Cedar Street. Her breath caught in her throat. The boy, the teenager from the bus. He had been wearing a hoodie just like the one in the picture. The flyer was dated a month ago. As she read further, other names followed: Margaret Foster, 65, David Emerson, 28. All had vanished after taking the same late-night bus route. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She hadn't imagined it. These people, these passengers had been real, but they were gone now, taken, swallowed by whatever dark force controlled that cursed bus. Why had it spared her? Her fingers trembled as she folded the flyer and stuffed it into her coat pocket. The cold night air felt heavier than before, pressing in on her from all sides. She needed to get away, far away from that bus stop and everything that had happened. Suddenly, the sound of an approaching car broke the silence. A taxi pulled up beside her, its headlights cutting through the mist. The driver rolled down the window, a man with graying hair and a friendly, tired smile. "Need a ride, miss?" Sarah nodded, her voice caught in her throat as she climbed into the back seat. She felt safer in the enclosed space of the cab, but the lingering sense of unease wouldn't leave her. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the driver said, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Sarah forced a small, weak smile. "Something like that," the driver chuckled softly. "This late-night shift does strange things to people. Where to?" She gave him her address, and the cab pulled away, the city's empty streets flashing by. As they drove, Sarah leaned back in her seat, exhausted, her mind replaying every eerie moment. The shadows on the bus, the motionless passengers, the man with the hollow eyes, it had all felt so real. She could still feel his icy stare, drilling into her, as if trying to pull her into the same darkness that had taken the others. When the taxi pulled up in front of her apartment, Sarah fumbled for her wallet and handed the driver a few bills. "Thanks," she muttered, stepping out of the car and hurrying toward her building. "Take care, miss." "Get some rest," the driver called after her. She nodded, barely hearing him as she hurried inside, locking the door behind her. Safe. She was safe now, in her small, cozy apartment. She glanced around, the familiar sight of her messy living room, and her cat Luna, curled up on the couch, bringing a brief sense of relief. Sarah collapsed onto the couch, hugging a pillow to her chest. The feeling of safety, however, didn't last long. Her mind was still racing, trying to make sense of everything. Could it all have been a hallucination? A dream brought on by exhaustion? Or was something far more sinister at play? Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out, half expecting a message from her boss, or maybe a concerned text from a friend, but what she saw made her heart skip a beat. A text message from an unknown number. "We missed you tonight. See you soon." Her blood turned to ice. Her fingers shook as she stared at the screen, the words blurring in her vision. She quickly typed a response, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who is this?" No reply. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Luna stirred on the couch, letting out a soft meow, but Sarah barely registered it. She felt cold, as if the very air around her had chilled to match the darkness that had surrounded the bus. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Who could have sent that text? Was it a prank? Or was it something worse? The thought of the man with the hollow eyes flashed in her mind. His words echoed in the depths of her thoughts. "We missed you tonight. See you soon." Sarah's stomach churned with dread. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, her heart thundering in her chest. Another message, this one even more chilling. "Next time, you won't be so lucky." Her hands went numb, and the phone slipped from her grasp, falling to the floor with a soft thud. She could feel the darkness closing in again, a suffocating presence that she couldn't escape. Her breaths came shallow and fast, her vision narrowing. Sarah knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. The bus hadn't spared her. It had just let her go for now, and it would be back. Epilogue. Sarah sat by her window every night after that. She avoided the bus, choosing to walk home instead, always looking over her shoulder, half expecting to see those burning headlights in the distance. But no matter how many nights passed, the text messages never stopped. They came like clockwork, always at midnight. "See you soon." She never replied again. She knew it was only a matter of time, and somewhere, out there in the dark city streets, the bus kept running its route, picking up its next passenger. Sarah could only hope that she wouldn't be on the last ride again. And so the ride comes to an end, for now. But remember, there are some roads you can't turn back from. Some rides never truly let you off. Thank you for joining us on the last ride. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, but tread carefully. The next time you hear the hiss of bus brakes behind you, it might be your turn to board.